Hey y'all, it's Heel Heat time.
Hi everybody and welcome to Heel Heat. My name is George Coles and this is going to be an episode of How I Would Have Booked. On this episode, we're going to go with the much maligned ECW on Sci Fi, also known as WWECW, or the reboot of ECW. Now I'm going to cover from the debut on 6/13 all the way up to the Elimination Chamber, which is the December to Dismember pay-per-view. And we're going to see how different I would have made it. And maybe mine could have been more successful. Now, coming off of it, July the 13th is their official reboot, the rebranding of ECW, and it's coming on Sci Fi. The story goes that after the success of the rise and fall of ECW DVD and the One Night Stand pay-per-view, that Shane McMahon had an idea to make an online-only show of ECW and air it from smaller venues. Kind of like what they do with NXT now. Except for back then they didn't have the network, it would have just been on WWE.com. I digress. They had this idea, they decided to shop it around to networks, and Sci Fi says, yes, we'd love to have that show. Leads into the second One Night Stand, which is more of a WWE versus ECW show, and then the launch of the new show. Now, I'm not going to change what led up, and I'm not going to change much of the roster. And I do understand that we're going to be working with some limitations due to the fact that this is Vince McMahon running the show, or running the whole thing, ultimately. So I tried to work within these guidelines. However, changing a bit, and also banking on the fact that if successful, Vince would let me make some of these changes. Starting off with the first show on TNN, the 6/13 episode, I start the show off with a recap of the One Night Stand from a few days earlier, sprinkling through the show a couple of highlights from the original ECW to get people caught up. And the two things I keep the same. I get away from the zombie match altogether. I understand Sci Fi wanted that element. But I would fight back against it and say, hey, look, this is a wrestling show. You take what you're getting, or we'll put it back on. We'll put it on the network. We'll put it on the .com as we were going to. But I digress. Maybe it wasn't a battle they felt like fighting. Maybe the money was too good. But either way, I would keep most of it similar. I would have one huge match, Kurt Angle versus Just Incredible. Kurt Angle basically coming over as a star to help out ECW. I'd leave it the same. I'd make it a longer match with Justin getting a little more offense so we could see that a guy that was a former ECW champion is still in the mix and not necessarily just a jobber for WWE guys. And I'd keep it more competitive. And I would have made that about 20 minutes of the show. Again, sprinkle some stuff in, have some little things here, maybe have a Sandman match against like a Balls Mahoney or something, instead of what we've seen against the zombie. And then the main angle of the show, or main event, I would have Rob Van Dam came out with, we seen he won WWE title from John Cena at the One Night Stand pay-per-view. Comes out with the title, starts cutting a promo, throws the title down, much like Shane Douglas did to the NWA title, says, I don't want to be a champion of WWE. I'm not a WWE wrestler, I'm an ECW wrestler. Goes over to the corner, picks up a bag, takes out of the bag the ECW World Championship, says, I am the ECW World Champion. I'm not the WWE World Champion. I stand for ECW. ECW's back, and we're going to take over the wrestling business. We see a bunch of people in suits scramble, running down to the ring, yelling and screaming, some that you do know, like maybe a Pat Patterson, John Laurinaitis. Security running out, basically screaming, yelling, cut the cameras, all kind of stuff, go to commercial, all of that. End the show. You hear them all yelling this, all yelling at Rob Van Dam, saying this wasn't supposed to happen, that wasn't what you were supposed to do, breaking the fourth wall a little bit. And as we're going to the end of the show, cutting off, and we see the little WWE thing that they put in the corner, the TM thing, where it's the end of the show, we see Paul Heyman walk out of the walkway and laughing. And boom, shows off the air. So now we've created a little bit of controversy. We've created a reason to watch the show. We've created a moment that wasn't really scripted, supposedly. Which leads us to the next Monday Night Raw, where Vince McMahon comes out, beginning of the show, says, Paul Heyman has to appear by the end of this show, or we're shutting ECW down completely, we're taking all his power out, everybody there is fired. We go through the whole Raw, Heyman comes out at the end of Raw, Vince says to him, I know you're behind this, Paul, I know this was your idea, we're not going to let Rob Van Dam not be the world champion in WWE, we don't like it, but every 30 days, just like the contract says, he has to defend that title. And I'm going to pick the opponent, Paul. And if he doesn't defend the title, and he doesn't defend it honorably, we're gonna shut ECW down, just as I had threatened earlier. We're gonna give up. We're gonna fire all these guys, and it'll be the end again. And you guys could go back to your bounce paychecks and working in bingo halls for $10 a night. Paul Heyman's shocked, which leads us into the next Sci Fi show, ECW on Sci Fi. You see Paul in the back telling Van Dam. Van Dam says, if he wants me to defend it, I'll defend it. Vince lines up over the next couple months, he lines up competitors between John Cena, the Randy Ortons, the Edges, the Big Show, all different guys. None of them can take the belt off of Van Dam. All the while on ECW, we have kind of the shift from the ECW originals, which they did anyway, but I would do it a little bit better to the guys that they were bringing in, where you have guys like CM Punk and Shannon Moore, Kofi Kingston, Sheamus, some of the other guys that they brought into there, have them start becoming a little bit more of the focal point, all while mixing in with the ECW originals like Balls Mahoney and Just Incredible and Danny Doring and Roadkill and all the guys that they kind of brought in, all while Kurt Angle and Rob Van Dam are basically your main event guys of the show. I'm building all this, simultaneously building up the newer guys while phasing out a little bit of the older guys, because let's be honest, folks, by the time they revived it, it was 5 years after the original show ended. A lot of these guys were 10, 15 years into their career at that point. It was about time for them to start retiring and start moving on. So, you kind of would have had to do it anyway. If ECW would have survived for those 5 years, you wouldn't have had the same roster that you ended with. You would have had new guys that came in. Now, in a perfect world, if Paul Heyman was given free reign, he would have brought in guys probably like the Briscoe brothers and Christopher Daniels, Samoa Joe. But again, we're going to wrap this in the constraints of what Vince McMahon wants to do. So the guys that we've seen that he put on the ECW roster, guys like Miz and Morrison, are going to continue to be on that roster. All the while you're building up CM Punk, where he's slowly getting up to the level of Kurt Angle and Rob Van Dam, who are your established two main guys on the show. In the middle of this, all the way through, and this is, like I said, we're going to take this all the way to December to Dismember, and that's a card we're building to. We have a tournament to declare the return of the ECW Tag Team Champions. Now, Van Dam's over here successfully defending the world title and the ECW title, because Vince mandated after a few defenses that we can't defend both at once. Every pay-per-view he has to defend each title, which makes it, again, more interesting. And he does have to show up on Raw, and he does have to show up on ECW, and he does have to fulfill contracts as both champions. We see it start wearing on Van Dam, and the assumption is that Kurt Angle is going to be the next guy. So it's kind of what they're leading us to think while they're building the younger guys. They start the tag tournament. They bring in the Hart Dynasty. You have the FBI that's already there, Danny Doring and Roadkill, Eminem, and, it whittles it down to the December to Dismember show. While all this is going on, the new guys being made, old guys starting to get phased out, we come to what traditionally even I've called the worst pay-per-view in the history of wrestling, which is December to Dismember. Now, I built it in a way that I'm going to go through the card, and this is what I have. The Tag Team Championship Finals, and this is exactly how I would work the show out, would be the first match. And I would have Eminem versus the Hart Dynasty. Winner becomes the new returning ECW Tag Team Champions. I'd have the Hart Dynasty win surprisingly, putting this new team over, having this kind of wrestling team that's based on wrestling. And that's another thing. I would start phasing out the hardcore elements. I wouldn't make it as dramatic as they did. I would phase them out and go for a more wrestling-oriented show. The rumor has been that Paul Heyman, if ECW would have went along, was going to phase out some of the extreme stuff and do a more wrestling-based show, kind of like Ring of Honor would be. And that's kind of what I would do. I would keep a little bit of the hardcore elements in there, but base some of my main angles against a more wrestling, mat-based, technical style, which the Hart Dynasty definitely were those guys. They could do that. So they're my new tag team champions, our returning champions, bringing the belts back. I go to a match that I'm going to keep from the original December to Dismember. Balls Mahoney versus Matt Striker. We've seen Matt Striker on the show. He's been the guy leading up to the pay-per-view as the anti-ECW, the hardcoreness, anti-all of that. So on this show, unlike the original December to Dismember, instead of it being an anti-hardcore match, he says, I'm going to beat one of your guys, one of your hardcore heroes, in his own style, and wrestles Balls Mahoney. Balls picks up the win, gives the fans a feel-good moment. But at the end, we see Striker's new talent that debuts. And at this point, I think this is where I would probably bring Sheamus in. This is about when they did. And I would have him managed by Striker, and kind of like they had different guys over the career there. Or maybe Umaga. Either one of those two guys I would bring in right here as the big guy to decimate Balls after the feel-good win. Next up, we have a dream match. Because we didn't have the Hardy Boys versus Eminem match, which was the highlight of the original pay-per-view, we still have Jeff Hardy available, and I have Jeff Hardy versus Sabu. And basically, with a High Flyers dream match, I put Jeff Hardy over just because, again, it's still a WWE show. You still got to work in their constraints. Sabu at this point was a shell of himself. He was not what he was in 95, 96, 97. His body was starting to fail. I passed the torch on to Jeff Hardy in an excellent kind of tables, ladders, and chairs style match, car crash match that both of these guys excelled in. Kind of make this the last big run of Sabu before eventually letting him go and go off to greener pastures. But I give Jeff Hardy the win because he's going to be a guy we're working on going forward. Next up, I have Hardcore Holly versus Kofi Kingston. This one I see Hardcore trying to be sadistic and beating the crap out of Kofi, only for Kofi to get the babyface comeback and pick up a win. I think Kofi Kingston, even this early in his career, showed enough promise that he should have been made a focal point, and he should have been made into somebody that could go on and defend or challenge for the World Championship. So this would have been my start of building him towards that, is Kofi beating a guy like Hardcore Holly. Next up, I have for the number one contendership. Now, if Kurt Angle wins, he's the number one contender for the ECW title. If Bobby Lashley wins, he's the number one contender for the WWE title. I don't move Lashley onto this roster just yet. Let's go with excellent match. We all assume that Kurt's going to win because Kurt has been being built to be the next contender for the ECW title. Bobby Lashley picks up a surprise win, setting up Lashley to be the guy that challenges for the WWE title at the Royal Rumble the next month. And Kurt kind of a little bit disappointed in his program. And yes, I believe he was already out of the WWE by here, but in my timeline, the WWE, instead of letting him out of his contract, sends him to a 30-day rehab, tries to help him out. Which maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. In my world, it does so. So, if I could switch time, that's what I would have done. That leads us to the main event. I'm going to keep it an Elimination Chamber match. I don't have any problem with that. The problem I had with the original one was the way it was pulled off. Now, here's what I would do. I would make Vince McMahon say on a Monday Night Raw, or come over to Sci Fi and say, we're going to put 3 ECW guys in and 3 WWE guys. Much like the number one contender match, if the winner is an ECW guy, he takes the ECW title off of Van Dam. If the winner is a WWE Raw guy or a SmackDown guy, he takes the WWE title off of Van Dam. The 3 representatives I have in the match for ECW are, of course, Rob Van Dam, CM Punk, and Tommy Dreamer. The 3 representatives I have in there for Monday Night Raw are John Cena, Edge, and The Big Show. I still have Big Show working ECW like he did, but he's working it as McMahon's henchman instead of Paul Heyman's henchman. I don't have Paul on the show as much. I don't have the authority figure as much because I'm wanting to produce the show and make it different than the other 2. We see Paul very sparingly through the year. So the Elimination Chamber goes pretty well. Everything's going good. Much like the initial, like the real thing, the crowd gets behind CM Punk early. Instead of having him defeated first, I have him last all the way to the end, where we have John Cena and CM Punk are the last 2 guys standing. So we know already there's going to be a new champion. We don't know which belt Rob Van Dam's going to lose, though. So the end comes where Van Dam and Punk and Cena are going back and forth. Out of nowhere, CM Punk gets Cena up on his shoulders, hits a go to sleep, picks up the surprise pin, becomes the new ECW champion. Thus, leaving Van Dam the WWE champion, which we'll see addressed at a later time, that Van Dam has to defend on Raw, so he has to take his title and his contract to go to Raw. Again, taking off some of the ECW originals while building up the guys, the young guys, to carry ECW into the future. You put it on Punk, who was hot at the time, who the fans wanted it to be on at the time, let him run with the championship for a little while, let him get his defenses against guys like Morrison, guys like Hardcore Holly, and go forward with him and see how far that could take it. All the while, use it just like you did the original version of it, for basically kind of what we see NXT as, except for I would make the ECW show kind of in between where NXT is now and where the main roster is now, where we still have people down in developmental, and before they go to Raw or SmackDown, or before they get drafted other places, they debut as part of the Superstar Initiative on ECW, and ECW builds them. And then we could see maybe in the next draft they go somewhere else, or they stay to help ECW. But I would use it as a launching pad, keep the show going as quasi NXT, what it is now, what the show morphed into. Instead of doing the challenge show, I would do it as we use this as our platform to bring guys up, basically. You still can bring guys up other ways, but this would be the main avenue in my opinion. But basically, that's how I would book ECW's return, the first 6 months of it. Let me know what you think. Do you think I'm off my rocker? Do you think it would be better than what they did? Do you think it'd be worse than it did? Let me know. Hit me up in the comments down here. Make sure to like and share this. Also subscribe if you haven't done so already. But basically that's what I have to say about that. My name is George Coles, and this is how I would have booked ECW on Sci Fi.